Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Aloe sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. The major world of Aloe sector is Enarch, a major trade world and regional headquarters for the Trade Federation. The fleet that blockaded Naboo and the neighboring Chamel sector operated out of Enarch. There's not really any more to the story than that, though. Not every sector has a story. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Boeas sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command in the mid-rim of the trailing sectors. Possibly the most historically significant thing to happen in this sector is that Savage Opress assaulted someone in a cafe on planet Stobar. There's also a mining planet called Lohopa 2 that resisted imperialization, although the records don't say how, and a New Republic prison planet called Tamazal, where people serve decades-long sentences for medical malpractice and space piracy? Maybe these crimes were more heinous than they sound at first glance, like maybe when they say medical malpractice they mean less sloppy back alley surgery accidentally kills someone and more harvested organs from living kidnapping victims for sale on the black market. Or maybe the New Republic are just kind of psychopaths, who knows. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Chamel sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command in the mid-rim of the trailing sectors. Chamel sector is basically the model for Republic sectors. Its capital is Naboo, by far the biggest and most important planet of the sector. It has its own style of government, a popularly elected supreme executive who's called a queen, even though that's not how queens work, but whatever. It has its own distinct culture, and the sector is ruled in accordance with that culture and legal tradition. Chamel sector gives other planets in the sector a fair bit of autonomy in the same way that the Republic gives Chamel sector a lot of autonomy. But the dominant economic, cultural, and political position of Naboo means that when Padme Amidala hosted the Chamel sector summit, she was in a position to pretty much tell everyone else how the sector was going to be run, and the only reason she didn't do that is because she's a class act who wanted to foster friendship and unity within the sector. Naboo is the homeworld of the Gungans. Its first human colonists arrived in the Old Republic era, and initially the two species had basically no interaction whatsoever. The humans stuck to the abundantly fertile river valleys near the planet's primary mountain ranges, while the amphibious Gungans never went further than a few hundred feet from sea level in either direction. In fact, the Gungans' primary war of unification happened after the humans' arrival, not as a result of it, but because the presence of a small human colony made so little difference to Gungan politics that they felt no need to present a united front to outsiders. The Civil War is multi-factional, but ultimately coalesced into two coalitions, one led by Boss Rogo and the other led by Boss Gallo. Boss Gallo won, and on the ruins of his rival's capital and the site of the final battle, he built Ota Gunga, a city for all Gungans. As human presence on Naboo spread, the Gungans became vaguely aware of the existence of a greater galaxy, but they were distrustful of outsiders, so they never took up space travel or even ventured much beyond the coasts. So the Naboo colonized the rest of Chamel sector, and they were the ones to join the Republic early on in the High Republic era, after the city-states of Naboo were united in a unification war of their own. Naboo got invaded twice in galactic history. The first time was near the end of the High Republic era when the Nihil Raiders started biting off chunks of Republic space. A Republic defense coalition bringing together multiple sector militaries eventually evicted them. The Nihil had enough troops and ships, and their heavy hitters were personally scary enough that the usual High Republic tactic of just throwing Jedi at the problem didn't work, but they were still particularly dangerous pirates, not really an enemy nation, so the Republic did not have to give up on the Ruusan Reformation to defeat them. The second time Naboo was invaded is the more famous event. Sith conspiracy, dispute over taxation of the outlying systems, blockade, invasion, alliance with the Gungans, this is pod racing. In the late Republic and Imperial era, Naboo became one of the cultural and political strongholds of the Republic in the Mid-Rim, similar to planets like Kashyyyk and the Outer Rim's Iriadu, proof that, despite the failure of the High Republic to bring the light of the core to places like Ryloth and Geonosis, it wasn't fundamentally impossible to make the Republic work far outside the core. The whole Emperor Palpatine thing put kind of a stain on Naboo's reputation, and I suspect that the heavy emphasis on the career of die-hard Republic loyalist Padme Amidala in Papanoida's Clone Wars films might have been intended to help rehabilitate the planet's reputation by emphasizing its long and proud history before Palpatine. And, not for nothing, while Naboo was never a particularly effective rebel stronghold, it was always full of rebel sympathizers. There was an assassination attempt on Darth Vader there that consisted almost exclusively of Naboo elites, former friends and allies of Queen Amidala, one of the planet's most beloved leaders. It also probably helped Naboo's reputation that it was one of the targets of Operation Cinder, Palpatine's contingency plan to kill Imperial planets for failing to prevent his death. Imperial satellites would have completely destabilized the planet's atmosphere and killed most or all of the inhabitants, but they were taken out by a rebel fleet led by Lando Calrissian. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Druess Sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. The only planet of note here is Sidizia, a high-gravity farming world that became a hotbed of rebel activity due to being largely self-sufficient. As a farming planet, communities could feed themselves, and as a high-gravity planet, shipping things around the planet was really hard, so most communities outside of the major starports had locally produced solutions for things like transportation and power generation. For example, they'd mostly ride six-legged reptiles called striders around because that was easier than getting speeder parts shipped out to remote farming communities on a high-gravity planet. And because they were so self-sufficient, and because it was so difficult for those not acclimatized to the planet to move around on it, Sidesians could basically opt out of the Empire. The Empire might send some demands out to the planet's hinterlands via HoloNet, but the remote farmsteads could just not respond, and the Empire would be hard-pressed to make them regret it without dedicating an entire Star Destroyer to orbital bombardment of one ranch house. Eventually, the Empire figured out a cheaper solution, the artificial supervirus called the Grey Death. Only the Empire had access to cures, and the hyper-effective disease could spread through both the water system and spores in the air for miles and miles, allowing it to reach even very remote locations. Once the disease had reached saturation, the whole planet needed to come into population centers for regular medical checkups, just like other planets' populations need food or machine parts or other trade goods that pass through choke points that the Empire can control. Control the choke points for vital goods, and you control the people who depend on those goods, and now Sidizia depended on medicine that only the Empire could give them. Until the rebels stole it, reverse-engineered it, and set up their own mass production facilities. Sidizia only has a population of like 50 million people, so while cure production did require super labs capable of industrial-scale production, it did not require the rebels to control a multi-planetary supply chain. The Empire did eventually flood the whole planet with stormtroopers, and the rebels were unable to prevent the planet from falling back under full Imperial control, but that was something of a victory in and of itself, tying up tons of stormtroopers on a middlingly, at best, important planet. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Dustig Sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. This sector is ruled by the Gran, but it's not their home sector. Their home planet of Kinyen is in 3 Besh Sector, trailing from Chrome Shield. There are 2 species actually native to here, and the Dugs are a whole thing we'll get into shortly, but let's start small with the Zehethra, a kind of badger-looking people who live underground in dens dug between the massive roots of the trees of their home planet Zeheth. Except when the population gets high enough to require vertical building, at which point practicality demands they leave their cool root dens behind to live in the same giant steel rectangles as everyone else. Kath 2 was a rebel stronghold during the Mid-Rim Offensive, which the Empire recaptured during the Mid-Rim Retreat. The only word on exactly how that happened is that the rebels had strongholds in the Karm Trenches, abyssal, deep underwater trenches, and the Empire used aqua troopers to dig them out. I'm guessing the rebels were mostly Quarren or other species at home deep underwater, but the records don't say for sure. Harun Kal is a minor, mostly human colony world that would normally not be worth talking about. Every sector has 1,000-ish worlds with less than 1 billion inhabitants between them, and if we tried to talk about all of them, we'd be here all day, and also we'd mostly be saying stuff like literally nothing about planet Opari survived the Dark Age following the purge of the bureaucracy for hundreds of planets, but Harun Kal gets to be in the video anyway because this is Mace Windu's home planet. Harun Kal was a jungle planet and the site of a major battle between the Republic and Separatist forces in the Clone Wars. According to legend, this battle saw an ongoing civil war get pulled into the greater Clone Wars, with the older Balawai faction supporting the CIS while the Karunai faction, which had more recent colonial populations, supported the Republic. Neither of these are an actual native species. Harun Kal has no sentient native species, but the Balawai are supposedly descended from ancient marooned Jedi, while the Karunai are people from, like, Corellia or wherever who moved here for a job or something. According to legends, Depa Billaba went fully insane and committed a bunch of war crimes here and had to be brought in by Mace Windu. That's almost certainly not true, because in less than a year, Depa Billaba was a Jedi in good standing, fighting on planet Doom, which seems like a really short turnaround for a fallen Jedi to return to active duty, even given the Clone Wars made things pretty urgent. I said earlier that Harun Kal was a jungle planet. The pro-CIS Balawai faction on the planet didn't surrender when the rest of the CIS did, and the Empire eventually used orbital bombardment to flatten a huge chunk of the planet, heating the air so much that the oceans began to boil in places. The environment wasn't so totally destroyed that replanted trees weren't able to start regrowing 30 years later, but reports on the ground said that stormtroopers far outside the targeted areas started convulsing during the attack, so that's some pretty extreme devastation. The most famous planet in this sector is undoubtedly Malastare, homeworld of the Dugs, and yes, that does say a lot about how well known the planets in this sector are. The Dugs were vaguely aware of the greater galaxy, but got introduced to the Republic properly at the very beginning of the High Republic era, when a bunch of Grand colonists set up the Grand Protectorate on Malastare, and the Dugs objected on the grounds the planet was already occupied. The Republic resolved the resulting war by splitting the planet between the Grand and the Dugs, and then giving Senate representation to the Grand of Malastare and not the Dugs, which you'd think the Dugs would hold a grudge over, seeing as how this is their home planet, and the Grand homeworld of Kinyen is doing just fine. They could just go live there, or colonize any of the many habitable but uninhabited planets in the galaxy. But I guess the Dugs didn't really mind, at least not enough that they didn't join the Republic and remain loyalists during the Clone Wars, which is when the Republic deployed an experimental anti-droid weapon on their planet and accidentally woke up an ancient kaiju. That being said, any accusation that the Zillo Beast incident was a result of a specious disregard for the value of Dug life doesn't hold up to reality, because the Republic's Zillo Beast-related mad scientist also wrought havoc on Coruscant. So, you know, the murders are equal opportunity. It kind of paid off for the Dugs, though. Like, strategically, signing the treaty to give fuel to the Republic war effort in the Clone Wars bumped the Dugs way down the Empire shit list in the Imperial era. An Imperial remnant, Grand General Kenner Loring, entrenched himself on Malastare in opposition to Fleet Admiral Gallius Rax's control over the Empire after Endor. Gallius Rax learned that Kenner Loring's remnant on Malastare was hostile towards him and conspired to get the Ascendant rebels to destroy Loring on his behalf, and then Gallius got himself killed on Jakku, which makes Malastare one of those planets, like Kashyyyk and Mon Cala, that were de facto New Republic worlds even before the government was officially declared on Coruscant. Also, back in the late Republic era, there was a Dug crime lord named Sebulto who made death sticks contaminated by mind-controlled Dugs on behalf of a dark side cult called the Bando Gora. Jango Fett killed Sebulto while hunting down the Bando Gora's leader, Kamari Vosa. I didn't want to work that in chronologically because it muddied the transition from Dugs getting screwed by the Republic over the Grand Colony and Dugs getting screwed by the Republic over the Zillo Beast, but it's a cool story and I don't want to leave it out, so here it is at the end. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Far Zandil's sector and the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Far Zandil's name is presumably related in some way to the Zandil system of neighboring Lambda sector. I have no idea why. Tucked away between all the major hyperroutes like it is, Far Zandil is pretty unremarkable. The only planet of note is Demnati. While Demnati was hit by pro-rebel riots during the Imperial era, the Empire sent Major Fenris Sarl to quell the riots. And by that, I do not mean a battalion of stormtroopers commanded by Major Fenris Sarl. Just Major Fenris Sarl. Apparently, he was expected to Judge Dredd the whole thing himself. No word on how that turned out, but it's worth noting that this was a civilian riot instigated by a handful of rebel agents provocateur, so it's not totally impossible that one sufficiently competent guy might be able to disperse them. Like, he's not going to do it by charging directly in and fighting them, but he might have been mostly there to track down the rebel agents under the assumption that without their coordination and leadership, the riots would be much easier to demoralize under pressure from ordinary local security forces. I'm guessing, though, the whole story here is that Major Fenris Sarl was asked how many squads of enforcers he'd brought with him, and he responded that he'd come alone. Maybe he was lying, maybe he was telling the truth and then immediately got killed because it turns out he was stupid. Who knows? Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Hevral Sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command. Hevral Sector is the domain of the Triffians, who you may recognize from Eid E. Endicott, if you're a fan of the Golden Age of pod racing, which is the source for like 40% of celebrities I use to help identify obscure species. Is this just me? I did get really into pod racing for a bit 2 or 3 years ago. Does the algorithm remember that? Is that why every time I search for something like famous Triffians on the HoloNet, it gives me pod racers? Anyway, the Triffians didn't participate much in the Galactic Civil War, but their sector sure got fought over a lot. Planet Cordair was the site of early skirmishes between the Empire and the Rebels before the Battle of Yavin, where the Imperials first deployed their AT-MP missile walkers. These things are absolutely terrifying anti-infantry and anti-vehicle weapons, so of course the Empire quickly phased them out in favor of walkers that suck. I make fun, but while the AT-MP was better at fighting conventional tanks and infantry than an AT-ST or even an AT-AT, it's still worse than the M2 Sabre fighter tank, while the AT-ST and AT-AT are much better at looming over civilian populations in a way intended to demoralize any potential resistance as compared to the squat, bulky AT-MP. The AT-MP is absolutely terrifying when it's unloading a missile barrage on a target, but the point of the Tarkin Doctrine is to terrify people into inaction, so you don't have to make direct assaults like that. And a weapon that's only good at the Tarkin Doctrine at the point when the Tarkin Doctrine has already failed is a bad weapon. Planet Kirska was densely urbanized and used as a fortress world by the rebels during the Mid-Rim Retreat, leading to the 3-month-long Siege of Kirska, where the Imperials had to dig the rebels out street by street. Kirska is not that important of a planet, its population is small and dense, so they couldn't spare the Star Destroyers or TIE Bombers needed to flatten the building outright. So instead, the Imperial Army troopers and stormtroopers just ate the losses of fighting door to door. The rebels pulled out of Hevral Sector and the entire 17th Chrome Shield Command during the Mid-Rim Retreat, but they came back between Endor and Jakku during the campaign from the Trailing Rim to the Trailing Core. Imperial forces made their stand at planet Glom Tho, but they were overrun pretty handily by rebel forces. Hevral Sector isn't super important, but it's in the Mid-Rim, and the Empire fought pretty hard for it during the Mid-Rim offensive. But they got kicked out of Hevral so quickly that the most prominent thing about the battle is the rebels' favorite brand of magnoculars. Yes, really, Neurosav still brags about this. And the speed of that defeat made it clear that the Empire was coming apart at the seams. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Hythrop Sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command and the trailing sectors of the Expansion region. Hythrop Sector is allegedly home to the Ulids of planet Ulidi. Although they have no description beyond a name, that name is shared with a planet, so as usual, I suspect this is a planetary demonym that's been confused with a species name. Hythrop Sector is named after Hythrop 4, a planet where some stormtroopers with a repulsor tank ambushed some rebels and Vin Northall took out the tank with a thermal detonator before fighting off the stormtroopers with a heavy repeater. It's real cool that this one guy took on an entire platoon, backed up by heavy armor. Even if Imperial repulsor tanks were garbage by tank standards, a tank is still a tank. But also you can tell I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel for stories to tell about this sector, because this was a fight with less than 100 combatants total. It's not like it was a major turning point in the war for the Over Sector, let alone the war for the galaxy. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Iskin Sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command in the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Iskin Sector has the ignominious distinction of being one of the few sectors added to the Republic by brute force. Even the Tian hegemony, admitted as a result of their defeat in the Tianese War, was at least admitted as part of negotiations to end the war, rather than having sector status imposed on them unilaterally after an unconditional surrender. Or Dorlas was a Pius Dea Ordnance Depot planet from the early Republic era, back when hyperdrives really sucked, and it could take weeks or months to travel even along major hyperroutes, let alone out in the boonies like Iskin Sector. As the name implies, ordnance depots were weapon stockpiles that the Republic used so that they could keep their armies and fleets resupplied. The original ordnance depots, built to support the original Pius Dea campaigns, which they called Crusades, were built along the border with the Hutt Empire, and the original premise of the Crusades was the core worlds bringing their high human culture with its enlightened concepts of liberty and justice, and imposing them by force on the corrupt and cruel Outer Rim and its debased Hutt culture of slavery and corruption. You can already see the hypocrisy here, with the Republic claiming that their imperialism is okay because they oppose imperialism. But by the time of the 12th Crusade, pretty much any fig leaf of justification had collapsed, and the Pius Dei attacked the Terracin and Xerxines for no better reason than because those two species had refused to join the Republic, unsurprising considering that Pius Dei was doing his level best to reduce all non-humans to second-class citizen status, and was consistently successful in doing so with newly added sectors in particular. The Terrazins surrendered, were incorporated into the Republic, and after an Alsacan-led, Jedi-assisted coup against the Pius Dei government, the Republic made Iskin Sector into the formal domain of the surviving Terrazins. The Xerxines' home planet was over in 16th Ivory Fang Command, several sectors over, and it got so environmentally devastated by the war that the Xerxines became permanently nomadic. The sector got named to Xerxine Sector by the Alsacan Republic forces, but the Xerxines, unsurprisingly, didn't really consider this a fair trade for their home planet being habitable, and they carried that grudge all the way to the late Republic when they joined the CIS. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Jurzan Sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the expansion region. Jurzan Sector is the domain of the feudal planet Hargiva. The planet was added to the Republic in the Old Republic era, so by the Late Republic era, the military nature of the aristocracy was pretty vestigial. The aristocratic men still had a tradition of doing a tour of duty in the Royal Guard, so it wasn't completely dead, but they hadn't meaningfully derived legitimacy from military force in a long time. Under the Empire, the military traditions got a bit more teeth, as King Macantay pivoted to being a formal vassal of Emperor Palpatine. Macantay's son Stevan led a pro-rebel uprising. Records don't indicate when, but it seems to have worked, and judging by how the rest of the Oversector went, it was probably between Endor and Jakku. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the Kira Sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the expansion region. Disappointingly, the Kira Sector is not home to any notebooks created by death gods allowing for supernatural killing sprees, but don't give up hope. I'm sure some dark side cult somewhere is working on it. What the Kira Sector does have is the planet Kerkoidia? I'm going to pronounce that Kerkoidia, home to the Kerkoidens. Kerkoidia went SEP in the Clone Wars, and there were a lot of Kerkoiden officers in the droid army. Kerkoidia was right on the edge of separatist space, and the Republic pinched it off pretty early in the war. The hits kept coming for Kerkoidens on nearby planet Plagan, when a CIS tactical droid fragged his Kerkoiden commanding officer to seize control of the armor. In the tactical droid's defense, he did then lead CIS forces to victory on the planet. Nigel 6 is a planet that formed a republic to deal with crime. It doesn't seem like they overthrew a mafia state or an authoritarian government that was in bed with crime or anything, so I guess the planet had no government before the crime problem pushed them to form a republic? That's not totally impossible, because Galactic Republic law would still apply, so it's possible for there to be crime on a planet even if there's no government. Nigel 6 is locally famous for being really strict about laws, and maybe our government was created in response to a crime problem is a story of how that came to be, oversimplified but not necessarily false. Kira Sector is also supposedly targeted by slave raids by the Iskalani, the native species of the planet Iskadrel in wild space. I would have covered that planet in my Unknown Regions video, but it's really hard to keep track of what all planets are in the Unknown Regions on account of the unknownness. Anyway, supposedly the Iskalani were attacked by the Empire in retaliation for their slave raids and managed to drive the attacking Star Destroyers off, but with heavy enough losses that they did not pursue the beaten Star Destroyers, and they did stop their slave raids, so the Empire was satisfied. When the Empire fell, the Iskalani sent a slave frigate to conduct a few raids and test the resolve of the New Republic, and according to some versions of the story, this frigate was sent to Kira Sector, which is why they came up while I was researching this sector. The spacers they abducted were able to regroup, break out, and disable the frigate. According to other versions of the story, the abducted spacers were captured in wild space, and the Iskalani were going to extract the location of New Republic worlds from the navigation logs on the ship to launch an invasion, and the galaxy was saved from subjugation to a cyborg army by those brave spacers. You can see why these elevated stakes make the story more compelling, but the idea that one planet was going to take on the entire New Republic is ridiculous, and the idea that the Iskalani could simultaneously be advanced enough to pose a threat to the New Republic while also not being able to find out where the New Republic is without stealing that information is even more ridiculous. Republic space is huge. The only way the Iskalani could possibly have missed it is if they basically never leave their home system. If the Iskalani are even real, the story that they sent a slaver frigate to Kira sector to abduct some spacers makes way more sense than this one planet being poised to subjugate the entire galaxy, but their entire plan of conquest fell apart because one of their ships got blown up. On the other hand, I don't find the idea that some captured spacers blew up an Iskalani frigate to be far-fetched at all, particularly since this story doesn't involve any rebel celebrities. My favorite line about Lazarian 4 that I found in my research on this sector is, the humans of Lazarian 4, known as Lazarians, discovered space travel fairly early during their technological development. Lazarian 4 isn't the human homeworld, so yeah, I'll bet they did. Lazarian 4 is also home to the Aquin, a sentient aquatic snaky eel-y sort of species. The Aquin live pretty deep underwater, and the militant, xenophobic Lazarians believed they were sea monsters who maybe didn't even exist, although that second one in particular sounds more like bigoted delusion than sincere mistake to me. If you were actually uncertain as to whether or not an underwater civilization existed or not, you would send a submarine to check. We're talking about entire cities here, not one elusive sea monster. Regardless of how sincere the Lazarians' disbelief in the Aquin's very existence was, the planet technically became an Imperial remnant after the Battle of Jakku. Unlike most Imperial remnants, this was one planet, not an entire oversector, but King Alaric X remained loyal to the Empire despite most of Chrome Shield going rebel, even before the formal establishment of the New Republic. Lazarian 4 is enough of a flyover planet that the New Republic wasn't sending Admiral Akbar to resolve the issue, but King Alaric's daughter, Princess Irina, led a secret splinter faction of New Republicans. As Imperial remnants in 14th Red Tails and 15th Hook Nebula quickly disintegrated into independent systems, Alaric was isolated while Irina had plenty of friends and supporters in nearby systems, so unsurprisingly, her rebellion won out over her father in the end and brought Lazarian 4 into the Republic. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Molgard sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Zeolosians are allegedly the native species of the Zeolosia system, although as usual with alleged species that have a name but no description of their anatomy, history, or culture, I suspect this is a planetary demonym mistaken for a species name. The only planets of note that I could find in this sector are Dargul and Umgul, two planets in the Darglum system. According to the stories, a con man named Dak, no not that one, married Duchess Mistal of Dargul before getting bored of her and making off to Umgul to gamble away the wealth he'd stolen from Mistal. Umgul is basically a casino planet and punishes cheating with death, so of course Dak started cheating immediately. Here's where I become suspicious of the story, because allegedly Lando Calrissian is the one who exposed Dak while looking for Force sensitives for Luke's new Jedi Order. After exposing Dak as a mundane cheater, Lando helped him flee the authorities, only to take him back to Duchess Mistal for a 1,000,000 credit reward. Like most stories of rebel celebrities, there's nothing insane about this one, but if you believe every spacer tale, you'd think that Luke, Leia, Han, and Lando made a point of visiting every single planet in the galaxy to have some kind of wacky misadventure there that the locals can tell visitors about. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Primtara sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command and the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Primtara sector is home to the Primtara Offensive, a campaign in the Rebel Mid-Rim Offensive between Yavin and Hoth. Colonel Aniana Sirte of the Rebel Spec Force bidded the Primtara Offensive, which checks out for how the Mid-Rim Offensive went for the Rebels. The only other planet of note is Garrus Ghoul, homeworld of the Kolis species, which is famous for Shrivel Braytrand, and place your bets on whether he is from the Golden Age of pod racing or a moderately obscure Jedi. Golden Age of pod racing. Shrivel Braytrand was a racer at the end of the era when pod racing was quickly losing popularity. He is most recognizable from the Sebulba's Revenge season, when the disgraced champion Sebulba returned and a rapidly contracting entertainment format embraced him in the hopes that he would thrust them back into the limelight. He did not. Shrivel Braytrand raced that season, he didn't do particularly well, and that is the most famous the Kolis ever got. Sorry guys. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at the Quest sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command and the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Quest sector is basically a sector from 15th Hook Nebula that got drunk one night and woke up in the wrong rim. It's a mostly desolate sector and the few notable things it does have are mostly pirates and killers. Planet Sablone has a pirate gang that came to the attention of the Rebel Alliance after they killed a rebel informant spying on the local Imperial garrison. The Tendo system was the Riorian murderer Stalnis' favorite haunt, and the sector's major world is Old Man Ku, which was a monarchy until the late Republic era when a popular uprising forced the royal family to step down. The rebels seized the wealth of the royals, but Princess Xian used her diplomatic connections to gain access to a lot of the kinds of galas and embassies that are really hard to break into, and she used that access to become a highly paid assassin. That's a hell of a way to maintain a lifestyle, but hey, it worked. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Rindelian Sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Rindelian Sector is the domain of the Drag, a reptilian species from Ninzam 6. The Drag are fairly poorly adapted to the kinds of environments that most species live in, so they have to wear these special environment suits. Standard oxygen-rich atmospheres aren't fully toxic to them, but they can't breathe it properly without this little apparatus, and there's some kind of temperature regulation going on too. Records aren't super specific on the details, but they basically all wear these jumpsuits whenever they aren't on their homeworld. Planet Farcine is a major trade and transportation hub in the trailing sectors. The Trade Federation had a regional headquarters there, and Farcine was where the Trade Federation made their last stand at the end of the Clone Wars. The Trade Federation was officially neutral in the war, claiming that Newt Gunray was a rogue agent, but Palpatine only entertained that fantasy because he needed the CIS to hold on for a couple of years. He needed that time to build up enough bloodlust in the Republic to get the people on board with a campaign of bloody retribution against the Outer Rim, which he could use to cement his authoritarian power. Liberty wouldn't have died to thunderous applause if the war had only lasted a few weeks. After the CIS had served its purpose, Palpatine immediately imperialized most of the corporations of the Separatist Council. The Trade Federation's forces under Vizier Marath Vuro refused the imperialization, and Palpatine sent 17th Chrome Shield to remind him of the differences between a business offer and a government edict. After Marath Vuro's forces were destroyed on Farcine, his remnants fled into 15th Hook Nebula, where they got chased around a bit, but the Imperials caught up with them and finished them off. This is also the sector where Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi caught up with the CIS battlecruiser Malevolence. It had been wreaking havoc across this theater, ambushing Republic ships in the early part of the war when the Republic was way behind in war material, and it got pretty close to taking out Plo Koon, but Obi-Wan and Anakin made fairly short work of it. Can you believe some people insist that the CIS were the good guys in the Clone Wars when they called their own ship the Malevolence? Both sides were run by the Sith. Every hero was a dupe for the villains. There were no good guys. The war with the First Order was a bit more black and white, though. During that war, Poe Dameron was fishing around for allies and went to the Ekrukians of planet Ekruk. Ekruk had a history of opposing the Imperials. Bernium Rowe tried to restart the Nihil Raiders from their stronghold on the planet during the Imperial era. It didn't go great for him, but resistance against the First Order was less the project of one guy who found a Nihil hat and made it his entire personality, and more a unified sentiment of the Ekrukians. The Ekrukians had built their cities underground, and they have some pretty intense orbital defenses, so while it was touch and go for a bit, they ultimately kicked the First Order out when they came and tried to subjugate the planet. Then when Leia sent out a distress signal from Crate like 3 sectors over, they decided they couldn't be fucked. In their defense, their main military advantage is planetary defense cannons and an actual mountain, and you can't exactly pick those up and move them, but come on. Poe Dameron helped you fight off the First Order, and you can't even find one frigate to help bail him out when he's got 80-80s bearing down on him. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at the Tyus sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Tyus sector is the domain of the Zelosians, a sentient plant species from Zelos 2. Allegedly. The Zelosians have some weird biology going on, and I'm not convinced they're real. According to the story, Zelosians look almost exactly like humans, with the only obvious external tell of their plant nature being that they all have bright emerald eyes. That eye color does occur naturally in humans, so even then you'd only notice if a bunch of them were together. Ordinarily, I'd suspect this is a planetary demonym that's been mistaken for a species name, that happens a lot, but supposedly the Zelosians bleed sap, are completely night-blind, and the records say they are photosynthetic, but also that they can survive for 1 to 2 months on only sunlight and water, which is not that much better than what humans can do. Still, it's not surprising that plants need to do a lot of regular old eating in addition to their photosynthesis if they're going to get up and move around as much as animals do. And while 1 to 2 months isn't that much better than humans, it is better than humans. I do slightly get a fetish history vibe from the fact that the only illustrations of the Zelosians on the HoloNet is this drawing of two young lovers on a day at the beach, but by fetish history standards, this is extremely restrained. Restrained enough that I actually lean towards thinking Zelosians are a real species, and, some of them are just young lovers on a beach. Another story of Zelos 2 claims that the Bear Forest is infested with parasitic worms that reanimate corpses, walking the corpses towards other sources of food even as they eat out the insides of the body. Just like the Zelosians, this sounds kinda like a spacer tale, but it's not super improbable, so I think it might be true. And Zelos 2 does have some pretty straightforward galactic history. The Imperials ran a major mining operation there. The Zelosians hated it. The Imperials mostly withdrew between Endor and Jakku as control of the whole Over-sector was totally falling apart, but there was a hidden Imperial base left over. The Rebel Alliance sent some commandos to knock the base over, and the Zelosians were initially hostile, having established a pretty militant planetary government after the Imperials left, in hopes that they could kick the Imperials back out if they ever came back. But eventually the Zelosians realized they were on the same side as the rebels, helped them take out the Imperial base, and became one of the planets that joined the New Republic before it was formally established on Coruscant. Greetings, my name is Chamomile and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Varhagen sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Alakatha is a resort planet and Vogel 7 had an Imperial Academy. These both sound like places important enough to have real stories on them, but they don't. Planet Vondark kind of has a story. It was where Imperial Admiral Sandar Del Vardis got his hands on a bunch of AT-ATs and invented the title Superior General for himself, but he took his new army to Iriadu. He was related to the Tarkans by marriage, so he hijacked 18th Night Hammer Command to establish the Iriadu Authority. We're talking about 17th Chrome Shield, so that's a story for another time. There's a more interesting story about Vondark, but it isn't actually about Vondark. See, Vondark was one of the targets of the unification campaigns at the very beginning of the High Republic era. In the last century of the Old Republic era, the galaxy completely collapsed into chaos. It was every sector and sometimes every planet for themselves, with lots of feudal warlords and military dictatorships popping up from the inner rim outwards. Lots of systems still called themselves members of the Republic, but the Senate was basically empty, so what they really meant by calling themselves Republic systems is that they were part of a loose coalition against the Sith. The Sith, likewise, called themselves the Sith Empire, but there was no actual Sith Emperor, and the Sith was only a loose coalition of dark side aristocrats. Republic systems fought each other a lot in this era, but only when there were no Sith forces anywhere nearby. Anytime the Sith were around to present a common enemy, Republic forces pretty consistently put their differences aside to fight the Sith. The Sith were much worse at this, which is why the Republic tended to gain more ground over time than the Sith, and ultimately the Republic won the century-long war. At the end of the war, the core worlds, which had maintained most of the actual legal structure of the Republic in the core, re-established actual Republic rule throughout the galaxy, and this ushered in the Golden Age of the High Republic, which began with the unification campaigns. The Ruusan Reformation officially disbanded all Republic military forces, but they retained a bunch of starfighters and some light infantry security forces. They didn't have tanks or artillery, so the Reformation was a genuine reduction in military forces, but it was not the total abolition of military forces that it's often portrayed as. The so-called judicial forces still had snub fighters with missiles and proton torpedoes, still had blaster rifles and thermal detonators and sniper rifles, and while I can't find confirmation on this one way or another, I'm pretty sure they even had mortars and rocket launchers. Certainly they had strong enough weaponry to forcibly reincorporate many of the warlords of the Dark Age back into the Republic, including at Vondark. These were planets that claimed to be part of the Republic in the Dark Age sense that they were part of the anti-Sith Alliance, but tried to continue operating independently after the Republic Senate began to reassemble the Republic as an actual unified government, even if a heavily federalized one. Vondark isn't that far off from the Grumani sector ruled by the Sith during the Dark Age, so it's hard to imagine it didn't have some pretty hefty defenses, but the judicial forces were sufficiently equipped to forcibly reintegrate it into the Republic, so the judicial forces must have had some pretty heavy weapons. As the High Republic wore on, the judicial forces were steadily de-escalated, which leads to one especially weird anecdote. At one point, there was an effort to revive the judicial forces by commissioning the Katana fleet. It was a boondoggle that never delivered, but the fleet called for 200 heavy cruisers. That suggests that the judicial forces had a comparable number, if not many more, in the immediate aftermath of the Ruusan Reformation. At which point, I'm not totally convinced they didn't have tanks and artillery too, especially since they were able to conquer planets like Vondark. I suspect the Ruusan Reformation is mythologized as a decisive end to the Dark Age and a beginning of the High Republic, but it seems like the Reformation probably started out pretty aspirational and only became reality after centuries of peace made the maintenance of large military fleets seem like an unnecessary expense. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an examination of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the Vendusii sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Vendusii is a sector that exists. The planet Vendusii is home to Vendusii crystal, and the planet Haluria is home to a type of animal called Halurian ice spores. I normally gloss over this kind of trivia, but that's the only information on anything in the entire Vendusii sector. Not every sector has a story. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Villanis sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command and the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Planet Prine is a sparsely inhabited desert planet of the sort every sector has hundreds of. Jedi Das Jenir and his girlfriend Ember Chankeli crash-landed there while on the run from the Empire and lived on the planet for a few weeks, dodging local slavers until a bounty hunter came to try and turn Das Jenir over to the Empire, and Das and Ember stole the bounty hunter's ship to escape the planet, so that's kinda cool. The outer rim end of the Prelemian trade route had a weirdly high density of casinos, and 17th Chrome Shield has a weirdly high density of resort planets. The latest entry is Alassa Major, a resort world colonized in the Old Republic era. They supposedly became rivals with Cloud City on Bespin, which, isn't Bespin a mining station? It's a really big, really nice mining station, but it's in the middle of goddamn nowhere. It's not the weirdest place for a resort, but I'm skeptical. Planet Kirima in the Kalinda system was a planet ruled by a monarchy and home to a company called Vespula Manufacturing and Exports, which got on the bad side of the Commerce Guild somehow, so the guild hired a bunch of bounty hunters to blow up their headquarters. This was right before the Clone Wars, so the Outer Rim Megacorps weren't officially the CIS yet, but they had droid armies and they expected to fight a war with the Republic any day now, so they were pretty aggressive about breaking the law. Why not? They were planning on fighting a full-on war against the Republic anyway. Normally I try to tie a sector into some kind of greater story, but sometimes there's just nothing here. Villanis is a sector that exists, and some random disconnected stuff happened there. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're looking at Vish sector in 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the Mid-Rim. Planet Gamelin was completely depopulated by the Emperor's Plague, a disease artificially engineered to target only humans. Records are scarce on exactly what happened, but I think this was part of Operation Cinder, the Emperor's Dead Man Switch project to kill all his subjects as retribution for failing him in the event that he died. This sector is also home to the Congenus system, whose native inhabitants are allegedly the Kingeni species, red-furred starfish people. There's very little record of them, which usually indicates that a more common species has been mistaken for a new species by someone who doesn't know about them, like all the four-armed species discovered by spacers who'd never seen Zexto before. The Kingeni have a clearly distinct anatomy, though, so I'm not sure what other species they'd be mistaken for. These guys might be legit. Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today we're looking at Yataga sector in the 17th Chrome Shield Command of the trailing sectors of the expansion region. The Yataga sector is home to, but not the domain of, the Adnarem species of planet Adner. They're humanoids, but they have no opposable thumbs, which has got to make it really difficult to hold things. The reason why the Yataga sector is not the Adnarem's domain is because they're an independent system and generally kind of antisocial. They have basically no family bonds whatsoever and instead join non-blood related social groups called a Steris. An Adner will be raised in their parents' Steris until about the age of 6, and then they get shipped off to boarding school and their parents never think about them again. After graduating from their boarding school, they join a Steris of their own, and they have to pay back the debt they incurred from their schooling. I guess it works out for them, but you can see why these guys are super off-putting to, like, the entire rest of the galaxy.